Okay, Rachel, welcome to the Convo Couch at Rights for Women.
Oh, thanks, Pam. I'm always happy to come talk to you.
Yeah, it's been a little while since our last chat for the podcast, and I think probably maybe two books ago, I chatted to you for the podcast, and you've got a brand new book out in 1 month from today.
Yes, How to Mend a Broken Heart.
Yeah, with that gorgeous purple cover.
It is a pretty cover. I have been blessed with by the cover fairies over the years, I have to say.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, we're going to talk a little bit about that today, and we're going to be talking about writing processes. And this thought came to me when, we chat sometimes on social media and different things come up about the writing process. And I think there was some post last week where we were both saying, oh, we don't really have a writing process or we don't know what it is. So
I definitely feel that way. I know people always ask, so what's your writing process? Or how do you write a book? And it's like, oh, I wish you could tell me. Also, I think it's a lot about being a bit more organized. I haven't kept records of how I've done everything, which I think, looking back, it would be kind of good to have. I'm getting very yelled at by various people when I say this, but I don't keep notebooks and stuff. Once they're finished, they're so messy that I get rid of them. And so then I can't even go back a few books and go, okay, so what were the notes like to start with? So, and my memory is failing me these days, so I don't trust it.
Oh dear. Well, I'm a little bit like you in that I sometimes sit down to think, what is my process? And I don't really know either. I do keep my notebooks, but having said that, I never really go back and look at them. So there's some things, I guess, that are common that I do use, like index cards, and the last few books I've used Scrivener and things like that. But
you've got way more of a process than me.
Well, let's go back to the start, because I'm calling this episode idea. What is it? First idea to first draft. So I'm interested in this, where do you get your ideas, and then the development of those ideas and getting them onto that, end of that first draft period. Because I think, talking to different writers, and particularly a lot of, aspiring or emerging writers, a lot of them get stuck part way and end up with, a drawer full of half finished manuscripts.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that is going to be hopefully of benefit to for everybody who's listening. Mm-hmm. So let's start with ideas. Are you I have a million ideas and no time to write them person, or are you a one idea at a time sort of girl?
I used to be I had more ideas, I think. So I've been writing now for about almost 25 years, not published all that time. And I think in the initial years and even the first few years of publication, so I think now it's 10 years since I've been published, I definitely had more ideas. They came more frequently. And I always knew, while I was writing a book, which is sometimes a bad thing. You mentioned before people abandoning kind of books in the middle, halfway through. And I think one of the reasons that happens is because you get a new shiny idea, or another idea you want to write seems like it must be so much better than the one you're currently writing, which never feels like it's, when you're in the thrust of it all, it never feels like it's going well, or I feel that way. So I think a lot of people just go, oh, I'm going to try this next idea because that will be the better book. And so you got to get to a stage where you go, well, I'm just going to finish this one and have faith in this one, and not go for the next shiny idea all the time. So I definitely used to have that. And I actually quite liked that, because when I did get around the halfway point of books, it'd always be like, oh, this is really bad, and I don't know how to finish it, and it's boring, and all these horrible thoughts that come into your head that are not necessarily true, I've learned now.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean it's easy to ignore them, but they always come sort of mid-book, I feel. Maybe there's that mid-book slump where you've set everything up, and then now you've got to kind of keep things going a little bit before the really exciting sort of dramatic parts happen at the end. I would always, get a new idea around then, and so that was actually quite comforting. I never let myself work on it, maybe write a couple of notes or something, but I never let myself actually write it. But knowing that I had the next idea, I would start thinking about it in my head. So while I was writing that one, I'd be fantasizing and daydreaming about the next idea, and I felt good knowing what I had to write. And so I never would say I was probably one of those people that had millions of ideas. I would say I've got lots of things I would like to write about. So, but they're not ideas. I don't even know if you'd call them seeds. There's a few issues. There's sort of a couple of characters that I would like to write about, like sort of a setup, I suppose, different things. But I've never, managed to sort of form them into an idea that I feel confident about actually writing. So they're sort of there, but I wouldn't say that they're like a lot of ideas waiting, if that makes sense. They're just things I would kind of like to explore one day. So no, I don't feel like I'm one of those people who has, like, I hear people say, oh, I've got too many ideas, I'll never get to write them all. And I don't necessarily feel that ideas are everywhere for me. I can see a newspaper article and think, oh, that would make a good story, but I'm not sure how to make that story, if that makes sense. Like, I saw someone on Facebook a couple of months ago had posted a photo of an email, like from a resort sort of in America, and it was saying you need to choose your sort of table that you're going to have when you come to stay at the resort. You can choose a table by the pool, or you can choose a table here that will be yours and the email was not actually to them, it was to someone else. But they said they'd been getting someone else's emails for 10 years. And they, all the junk mail and stuff. And there was a bit of a story on there. And I thought, oh, I like that idea, but that's some of the things that I think, oh, that would make a good story, but how? And it's a matter of taking all those. So I think I get lots of those little things daily that, oh, yeah, this would be something good to write about. But I don't feel that they're solid ideas. And so, I'd say I'm more someone who is a one idea person at a time. Even though there's lots of things I would like to write about, they're just sort of, they're not, does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense to me, because I'm exactly the same. Like I'll often, like, I think it was this morning actually, like I follow Humans in New York on Instagram and Facebook, and often I'll read those stories and think, oh wow, that will make, like it'll be a family issue or a relationship issue or something. I think, oh, that'll make a great story. I never take the time usually to bother to write it down. And then later on, I'll think, oh, what was that?
What was that?
What was that idea?
And you have to end up scrolling through all the things. I think there's a problem, I don't know, as well. So I've got a couple of, one thing I've been interested about for a few years, and I've even pitched my publisher the contract that the next book that I'm contracted to write is supposed to be this book. And it's about multi-level marketing. And a bunch of women who are all involved in sort of a multi-level marketing scheme type thing, and I'm really fascinated by that concept and how it can become very cult-like, and they prey on sort of vulnerable people sometimes, and a few people do really well. And I feel like I need to write this because it's something I'm fascinated about and I've been thinking about for a while, but I'm not. At the same time, I don't feel like I'm ready, but then I'm scared someone else will come along. And
I was going to ask you about that, because that, I'm pretty sure you've read Big Magic.
Yes.
Gilbert, we often talk about craft books, but
I've got it right here.
Oh, yay.
And exactly that concept.
Yeah, that story she talks in there about, I think it was State of Wonder was the book, and she had the idea for the book and had let it sit there and not done anything with it. And then when she met Anne Patchett for lunch one day, and Patchett recited this story she was writing, and it was exactly the same idea. So
I think about that a lot, and I love her idea as well, but there are ideas sort of flying around and it might land on you, but then if you don't listen and you don't or say I'm doing something else, and so often that I think once you are a contracted writer and you're writing books all the time, you are focused on what you have to do. So sometimes an idea might come along that you can't give attention to. And then, so I'm very scared about that it'll, and I also think maybe in that book as well, I feel this happens with me sometimes with ideas. Like I got the thing that I wanted to write about, that concept of marketing kind of a few years ago, but I was doing other things. I was contracted to other things. And now I think it's been with me for so long, I'm not sure that it's almost been too long, and it kind of, so idea can get stale, if that makes sense, if you don't actually jump on it when you're passionate about it. So it's a really hard balance between abandoning books halfway through because you've got something better. I think that whole Big Magic concept is fascinating, and there's a few other things that I really like to write about too, and if I've told my agent or my publisher, they're like, oh yeah, that's a really, really good idea, but I actually don't feel like I can write it, which is possibly me mentally just sort of stopping myself, which is stupid, because I think the more books I write, the more I do that. Whereas previously I would have just gone, okay, I want to write a book about 4 women in a multi-level marketing. I'm just going to start. I'm going to write it. And it'll and I love listening to Marianne Keyes talk too about, how she just follows she just trusts her gut and trusts the magic kind of thing. And that's what I've always done. And I think lately I sometimes doubt that that's okay, that's, I think, oh, I should be doing more planning, or I should be doing this. But everyone writes differently. And I think in some ways my process is to take quite a vague idea and to just go for it. But that's scary because, it might not work out. And the more, when I'm doing it for a job now, I need it to work out. So
so there's more pressure.
It's
more pressure on that idea, isn't it? And that process. Definitely. And
I think that's another thing Elizabeth Gilbert said, which I really relate to as well. And you possibly will agree. I'd say a lot of writers would agree. She talks about how you should not let your passion pay your bills, because then or you shouldn't rely on your passion to pay your bills, because then it puts on that creativity and that hobby passion that you love. It puts a pressure that does sometimes hinder creativity. So
it's really interesting. It's sort of that rock and a hard place, isn't it? Because you are doing what you love.
Exactly.
For a job.
So many people say like, oh, it's my dream, I can't wait till I can quit my job and write full time. And I'm always like, nowadays, don't necessarily rush, because being in another job, being out with different people that are not necessarily in the writing world can really be that it gives you ideas. You hear how people talk, it refills the well. Whereas when I stopped working and write full time, suddenly I'm just by myself in a room. I'm not experiencing the world as much. So I think it's a two-edged sword. It's the dream, but then as I guess with all dreams, nothing is completely positive, if that makes sense.
No, I think that's really interesting. So Rach, once you get your say you get the idea, we talked about where a lot of those ideas might come from. What's the next step for you? I guess coming involved with this question is, are you a plotter or a pantser? And maybe you can talk a little bit about How to Mend a Broken Heart in terms of where that idea came from, and then how you then developed that.
Sure. I would say I don't believe anyone's completely a plotter and anyone's completely a pantser, but I definitely hear, a lot of authors are way more plotter than me. I hear Jane Harper and Sally Hepworth talk about their outlines, and the outlines are almost first drafts in terms of the detail that's in there per scene and what it's got to do. I definitely don't do that. I love the thought of it. I think it feels like it would be a nice safety blanket to know you've got it sort of written out there and it's going to work out. You've just got to add the embellishments and things like that. But when I say I'm a pantser, it doesn't mean that I just literally sit down at the computer and start writing and hope for the best. I always know although maybe I should, maybe that's what I always know when I start a lot about character. To me, most of my stories are character focused, and the plot is not secondary exactly, but it's expounded along the way because of the way the characters act, and that's one of the things I learned. When I very first put, I should say, fingers to keyboard when I was 17, and I wrote a terrible book. But I thought, great, I can play God. I can manipulate these characters and make them do what I want to do, which I can't do in real life, which is really annoying. But I thought, now I've learned, 20 odd years later, that no, that's not necessarily the case. I can't play God, because characters become real people and they dictate, they won't do certain things because of the way their personality is or what's happened to them in the past. So I think what I do is I'll get an idea. So say for How to Mend a Broken Heart, which is I'm calling it a semi-sequel, because it does take one character from one of my previous books, Art of Keeping Secrets, and it takes her 4 years on, and her daughter as well. So her daughter wasn't a main character in the first book, and it sort of shows, where she's at 4 years after what happened in the first book, which was traumatic experience for her, end of her marriage. And so I knew I had characters there, so that was kind of a little bit easier. But what was inspired kind of this book, I always wanted to write a book set in New Orleans, in America, because I'd been there a couple of times. Absolutely really loved it. The whole history, the haunted element, the beautiful buildings, the art, the music, the food, so much. I just loved the place. And I think it's a place you love or you hate, but I fell into the love it. So a few years I knew I wanted to write a book about New Orleans, and that's, I guess, where I say I've got things I want to write about, but there's not time yet.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking about, that was there. The fact people were asking me for a sequel to The Art of Keeping Secrets was there in my head. Another thing with this book, so there's sort of three key inspiring parts. One's the setting, one is the fact that people wanted a continuation of Flick story, and the third one is the only book that I read in high school English, I was shocking, was Great Expectations by Charles Dickens.
Right.
And I loved the character of Miss Havisham, who was jilted on her wedding day and then wore her wedding dress for the rest of her life, basically, and was bitter against men and all. And I always kind of wanted to do a modern day Miss Havisham character. So those three things have been in my head for a while, and then I decided I was going to put them kind of together. So I already had the characters, but I had to remind myself about Flick. I had to work out who the other main characters were. And what I do then is give them a job, I suppose. I give them a personality. And one of the books that I always sort of look at when I'm planning a novel is The Complete Writer's Guide to Heroes and Heroines, 16 Master Archetypes. There's other ones, but this kind of takes archetype. It gives you I have an idea in my head, that say Zoe, the character, is the daughter in How to Mend a Broken Heart. She's artistic, she's a little bit flighty, but she's really passionate, and she's got married young to a high school sweetheart. She's got all these ideals, I knew that she was, say, a little bit like a free spirit, but also so then I go to, that's one of the archetypes in this book. I go there and then I write all the things that sort of relate to me so I often use this archetype book. I sort of select an archetype that already feels right for me. Sometimes it'll be mixed pieces, and then I write a whole load of notes about what that type of character would be. And I find that this book often gives me sort of inspiration about different scenes or occupation and that. I also, so to me, jobs are really important to my characters. They sort of give you an idea of the type of person, that does certain things that, and then you can twist that a bit, make it. So I'll always choose a job. I'll always choose an archetype, and then I'll dream of the characters. I'll also now also think about what sort of shaped them. So another book that I love is the Emotional Wound Thesaurus by
I love that.
Ackerman and Becca Puglisi. I mean, that has a whole load, and I don't necessarily always use that, but if people are looking for a specific something that's happened to their character's past, that can help inspire you. But I do know what sort of shaped them and what bad thing, I suppose, has happened to them, whether it's just the beginning of the book or whether it's something from childhood. So I do a lot of it's all character thinking. I like to know the ending, but I don't always. So in terms of plotting, I won't go, then this is going to happen in each chapter. I kind of just go, all right, I've got to introduce my characters. I've got to show you, what's bothering them, what they want in their life. So it's looking at their goals and their dreams, their past, their job, all that kind of stuff that sort of creates them to be a real person to me. And then I throw them into the situation and I kind of just write and hope for the best. I know there's a lot of books, that give you all the different things you're supposed to do, whether it's 3-act structure or 6, and especially if I'm floundering, sometimes I'll think, I've got to do that. I've got to go and find an enticing incident and what's the call to whatever, all those different things. Yeah. But then I really start panicking. It actually stresses me out more I've worked out if I'm trying to know those things, I've got to do it more organically. And I love Marianne Keyes. She said when I listened to her recently on her Instagram, I don't know if you saw any of.
Oh no, I keep meaning to go back and watch that. I hope she's got it there.
She does still have it there, I think. And she's a really organic sort of intuitive writer, I guess. She said she didn't even know what an enticing incident was till a couple of weeks ago. She doesn't know about 3-act structure. And I love that because that's exactly how I feel. So to me, it's and that is scary because I don't know, whether you're going to write way too much of a setup or whatever. But the best books I've written, I think I've been really just letting the characters sort of take shape and just really trusting that there is an element of magic. I think that's why I like Elizabeth Gilbert's Big Magic book. And sometimes, you'll find you write something. I've got examples of this in one of my books, early rural romances, Mandrout. I've got a main hero heroine and her 2 best friends. And I didn't know, anything about the two best friends. I just knew that I wanted to have two best friends at the beginning of the book. So I was like, I've got to make them, I've got to do something with them to make them distinct, different on the page. I'm like, okay, one can be pregnant and the other one can be really into fashion and loves reading magazines and that kind of stuff. I just did that. No thought to why. And then the woman who's pregnant, her baby ends up being delivered by the hero, spoiler, and it's actually a really big part of the book. But I never thought, I'm going to have a baby born in the book that the hero. So I think sometimes when those things happen, you've just got to go with it and not censor yourself in that first sort of draft. Sorry, I've probably gone all over the place.
No, that's great. Yeah, so like you're setting up, you're getting your characters sorted, and then, as you say, throwing them into a situation, but then also trusting that process. And the other thing, Rach, that struck me as you were talking, like, even if you're not ticking off, first turning point and second turning point technically, like, I'm sure that since high school English, you've read loads of books.
Yes.
And you've written loads of books as well. And so you'd have an innate understanding of how those, where those things should happen anyway.
Yeah, and I think that's a big key. I mean, whenever I say I only read one book in high school English, and I was even thinking a few seconds ago, I'm like, I need to tell you that I have since then become a reader. Like, I found reading around the time I found writing, and I'm, probably now, if I had to choose between reading and writing, if I, someone held a gun to my head and said you can only do one or the other for the rest of your life, I'd probably choose reading. I love reading so much.
Yeah.
And I think reading that's the best teacher, definitely. I remember, and that's, I think, another reason why it took me so long to get published. There's lots of different reasons and elements of luck and things like that too. But I didn't have that background of a lot of reading. So I had a lot of catching up to do in terms of that, just, knowing how a story is shaped, and just because it's intuitive, kind of the more you read, you kind of just know. I remember a few years ago, I was talking to Helene Young, author, who we both know, and she was, I think I must have been doing a workshop or something, and I know that she'd done a lot at the time. This is quite a few years ago now, actually. And I said to her, what are your workshops? And she sent me a list of all the things. I said, I need to come to your workshops because I don't know anything about any of those things. And she said, Rachel, you do. You do it. I've read your books. It's there. So I do think that there's more than two types of writers, but there's definitely those who have more of a structured process, I suppose, and things they follow, and they do know more where they're going. But there's just as many writers in the world that don't. I mean, if you look at a few years ago, I had a slide that I used to show, and it was the pantsers versus the plotters of big name authors. Someone like James Patterson, I'm sure he says you have to plot, that you cannot write a book without plotting. Yet Stephen King, I'm pretty sure, I'm hoping I'm getting the right ones, and Liane Moriarty don't at all. Marianne Keyes doesn't, and they are all equally successful big name authors. I think all of us would agree that they, know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So there is no one right way to do it, but we're always looking. It's like diets. Whenever I see a glossy magazine in the supermarket, the checkout, and it's like, lose 5 kilos fast. I mean, yes, finally, someone's going to tell me how to do this. And it's always just exercise and eat less.
Yeah.
And so there is no secret kind of thing, unfortunately. Yeah.
No, very true. So once you get that, you've got your idea, you've sorted out your characters, and you sit down and you start writing, is then it just a matter for you of basically writing through to the end? Do you revise as you go, or, what happens in that stage?
Well, first thing, I'm very chronological. I'm very, very rarely, like probably 5 times in all my writing career, have I gone ahead and jumped and written a scene that, is not following from something else.
Yeah.
So I have to write chronologically, even if I kind of know what's coming and I'm stuck. I just can't move on until I fix the bit there. That's a part of me, I've learnt. Sometimes I'll write an epilogue. If that's come to me, a few of my books, I've written the epilogue about halfway through, and that's always feels good. But apart from that, I write chronologically, and I sit down, I kind of work out, okay, I've got, 4 months to write a book. I need to write this many words per day. I'm such a slow learner, and I still don't take into account the fact that, hey, someone will be sick probably, and my computer might break for a week, and I should allow myself that extra time, but I still haven't managed to do that. So I say, when I'm writing, and I think I'm going to look at this, but my aim is usually 2,000 words a day, 5 days a week. So 10,000 words. And I might not always get there. Sometimes I might get over 2,000. I find if I write anything like 3,000 in a day, then I'm stuffed for 2 days. I won't write, So for me, 2,000 is an achievable goal. And, most days I can get there. Some days I don't. So it kind of evens out, though. I think if you have a goal for me, and again, this is for me, some people don't have a goal at all, and that's fine. That's the way they do it. And I listened to Craig Silvey the other night, and he was saying he doesn't see the point of having a word count goal because, then you're just writing basically crap kind of thing just to get to your goal. And I definitely agree with that. And so I think it's a balance. It's a matter of sort of knowing, like, I aim for 2,000 words, but I can't just, like, if it's not working, I do need to stop and go, okay, well, maybe today I'm not going to get 2,000. Maybe I'm only going to get 1,000, but I'm going to make sure that I know where I'm going kind of next. So it's kind of a loose goal. But it kind of works out. If I've got that goal, then by the end, some days might be 1,000 days, some days might be no words, other days might be 3,000, but that's sort of what I aim for. And then, I do pretty much write from beginning to the end. I use Word. So someone asked me the other day, what program do you use on Instagram? I'm like, just boring old Word.
Yeah.
And, I know other authors who will do a chapter in each, a document per chapter and then put it all together at the end. I literally write the whole book from start to finish in one document. And I have a terrible, terrible habit that I tried to kick a bit last year, and I think I managed a little bit, so I wouldn't recommend this to anyone. And that is that I have to read the book the whole book before I start each writing session.
The whole lot that you've written up to that
the
point.
whole thing. So it's okay when you've written like a chapter because, that takes maybe 20 minutes and you tweak things as you go. And that was, I think, my original sort of process, and that's how I have a quite clean draft by the end. Is you read yesterday's session and it kind of gets you in the zone, and you fix things that not major big things, but little grammatical errors or word choice and stuff like that. But then somewhere along the lines, I stopped just reading the previous day's work and started at the beginning and skim through. But when I say skim, so I don't I don't read it word for word, but I do read quite a lot. And so when I've got 100,000 words and I'm nearing the end, that can take me 2 or 3 hours, and then I feel like I've done a day's work and I'm tired and I don't want to do anymore. So it's a terrible thing to do. So I would not recommend that, and I've tried to kick it a little bit lately. But basically I will ideally I'd have time once the first draft is done to sort of let it sit and read over. But I'll be honest, the last few years often, for one point I was writing a couple of books a year, and so basically there was much time really in between editing and the other books and promotion let it sit. And also somewhere along the lines, I used to be ahead of deadlines, and now I'm sort of like very much just getting it done so there's often not much time to revise before I submit a book. But it's clean, but it can depend. Some books require more work after that point still, and others not as much. So I don't know. Did I answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So you were saying with all the other commitments you have, obviously you've got children, you've got three kids, and you've got your social promotions and promoting the book that's coming out and all that sort of thing, and then writing another one. Have you got a set routine in terms of when you sit down to write, how long you spend, and do you do your social media at a certain time, or how do you juggle all those things in your life?
Well, in theory, I do have a pretty good routine, I suppose, but I'm very bad procrastinator in terms of I do have my routine is that my kids are all luckily now at school full time, and so I work basically school hours. I will come home from drop off or whatever, and I have at least, I was about to say half an hour, but let's be honest, it's more like an hour of what I call faffing around time, and that's checking emails, doing any sort of admin. Like I know a lot of people say you should get you get your writing done while you're still fresh, and I do prefer to write in the morning. If I do anything in the morning else apart from my computer, like if I have an appointment or anything, I'm basically stuffed the rest of the day. So I protect my writing time a lot in that I won't schedule appointments if I can absolutely help it until the afternoon.
Right.
And so that, you know, writing gets done. That's my first priority in the morning. But I do feel like I need to go through my emails, and it kind of just gets me in the zone. I think just doing a bit of Facebook, Instagram, going through my emails, and then I do that. So that's kind of my faffing, but then I sort of my getting in the zone, which is then reading the whole manuscript, which is what we're not going to do. Don't anyone do it. But like, you know, it's maybe what I should be doing is reading the next page, like last sort of work, and so that takes, you know, another half an hour. So I aim to sort of fully start writing by about 9:30, and then I will write in sprints often. That definitely get the best words done if I'm, well, not necessarily quality words, but the amount of words done and most productive if I'm doing sprints. I've got a couple of writing friends, and we'll say, if we're all writing a first draft at the same time, we'll say, okay, no one check their email or Facebook or anything from, you know, 9:30 to 10 o'clock. They're in the Eastern States, so that, you know, and then report back. And I'm much more likely to get a good chunk and not procrastinate by going onto Facebook or email, because otherwise I'll write one sentence and then say, oh, I wonder what's happening on Facebook. I recently did a social media brief course, and one of the things which I do think I can improve on is not being there almost all day, but scheduling time to reply to comments and things like that. So I'm going to work on that a little bit more, that, you know, I've got the morning, and then maybe at lunchtime, and then maybe in the evening while other people are, you know, doing other things, you can, but really trying to prioritize the writing time during the day.
So you've already said, Rach, that you're a procrastinator, which I can again relate to. But do you have any tips for listeners on getting out of that procrastination state or overcoming it?
I'm trying to put my phone in a different room now, because I find I'm worse on like Instagram and stuff at procrastinating than, so I can close a window down. But with my phone feels like it takes, I scroll more and, you know, waste time more. Whereas if I'm on my computer, I feel like it's more business type stuff, and I quickly look at my page, I answer some stuff, and then I go away. I'm less likely to, my biggest probably procrastination thing is actually online window shopping. Sometimes it's actually online shopping, you know, and a lot of that stems from Instagram too.
Yes.
Because I see all these, you know, I follow these great, you know, small makers and businesses and stuff, and then their stories are interesting, and I'm just, you know, losing ages, you know, looking at clothes or earrings and stuff like that. So I think the tip would be for me, I probably need to tell myself, is to unfollow a lot of people or mute a lot of people and just, you know, check them when you know, think about it or when you want to, and not just get lost down that rabbit hole. But I think it's just self-discipline. I don't think there's any secrets apart from going, I really want to achieve something. And the only way I'm going to achieve that is if I don't do something else for a while. I don't think there's any secrets. Again, it's a bit like diets.
That's right. And finding, you know, finding what works for you. With your draft, so you said, you know, you are chronological. You start at the beginning. Once you've got your characters, you go through to the end. You know, you allow around 4 months to do that generally. Do you have, or can you think of any times when you've really hit a wall with some of your stories and you just get stuck, and what do you do in those instances?
Yeah, I can tell you a very recent one. So the book that I have just finished revising is called Outback Secrets, supposed to be coming out at the end of the year. I started this book, I would say around August time. Yes, that's right, because I remember being at the Romance Writers Conference thinking about it online. Yeah. So it would have been sort of the beginning of August. And I thought I had an idea of, basically I realized looking back that I didn't know my characters well enough, and there wasn't really enough of a plot. I was trying too hard, I think, if that makes sense, because I knew I had to write a rural romance. I knew it had to be set sort of at Christmas time. And I had a character from a previous book. So I was kind of having to manufacture the heroine to fit that. And I got it wrong the first time. I wrote 30,000 words, and I wasn't feeling it. I liked the characters. I liked a lot of and this is the hard thing when this happens, because certain phrases I really loved. But then I decided, no, I wasn't I was actually feeling physically ill. I don't know if you get that, Pamela, if your book's not working, where you actually feel sick. I would wake up and think, oh my gosh, I've got to write this book and it's not working, but I need to write it because it's due in December, and I was like, what do I do? Do I keep going? And I talked to some writing friends who knew that, well, one particularly my critique partner, who knew what I was trying to do. She knew what the conflicts were and the goals. And she's like, it's all there. You've got two characters who have goals, who've got conflict. It's you. Basically, she's saying you're the problem.
You're the problem.
Not the book. And she's probably right. But I was like, that may be the case, but I'm not feeling it. And I don't feel that it is. So I was like, one day I just had a nap when I should have been writing. I thought, we went up north to visit my husband who lives up in Newman at the moment. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to write 500 words of this horrible book a day, even though I'm just going to 500 words while I'm up there, because then at least I'll be, staying in the zone and kind of. And then one day I just could not, the thought of writing my 500 words either. I was like, oh, I'm just going to have a nap. And I woke up from that nap and I was like, I have to start again. I have to completely start again. I had 30,000 words. It gets worse, Pam, because then I thought, okay, what am I going to do? I'm going to find a different character. And I came up with a completely different hero, and I kept the hero because I had to. So he was the book's about the pub, and he's the publican. So I kept him, as he's from the previous books. And I brought a completely different character in. Fell in love with this lady. Her name was Bridget, after Bridget Jones' Diary. Her mum was reading the book in hospital, and she thinks she was cursed because, of her name with men. She was a librarian, come back to town. Her brother had just died, and it was through horrible, tragic circumstances. And that's why she gets drunk and goes in the pub. And it all worked really well. And but there was other parts of it that just wasn't working. I wanted her, the time that she needed to be in town, she was putting on a pantomime as well. Anyway, I wrote 35,000 words with her. And I thought, I love this story. I love the characters. I love the idea of it, but it's just not working.
Oh, no.
And I can't even really explain. It was more the timeline thing with this. I needed their relationship to be progressing, but at the same time, the timeline of the book, you can't put a pantomime on very quickly. But so it's hard to explain. But basically, that wasn't working either. And my crit partner again is like, Rachel, you're stupid. It is working. She's read you have the conflict, you have characters, you have a plot. I was like, no, it's just not working. I can't do this. And so then I started to start again. And by this time, it was the end of November. Middle of November, and it's due it was due the 1st of January or the 4th of January. But I was like, so I'd written 65,000 words of two different versions. And I started again. I was like, well, okay, Rachel, you can't stop. This has to be it. Because I think my fear by this stage was, is it something in my head that is just, for some reason I've hit a mental kind of block, and it isn't the words, it's me. And my fear was, okay, I could write another 35,000 words or maybe 40 this time. And then I'd hit the same feeling.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, okay, well, if that happens, basically my career's over. I can't, because I don't know what to do. Or I'm just going to have to keep writing, and no matter how I felt in 30,000 words, I thought, even if I think I'm going to have to stick with it. And I did. And I changed the heroine again. And I think this is how sometimes if you're not feeling it, it's horrible, but you've got to trust your gut. I changed this heroine to an ag pilot, and she was much more rural than my other two. And one of my feelings about the book was that it wasn't rural romance enough, and that was what it was supposed to be, because I had a publican hero. And the other two heroines were not rural, really. And so as soon as I changed her to an ag pilot, I was about to say it seemed to, and I went back to basics, like with romance tropes. I thought, okay, I need a plot I can follow. I asked another writing reviewer friend, what's her favorite trope? And she said she really enjoys fake relationships. I'm like, okay, that's it. That's what I'm doing. And so then I sort of had with these tropes, you do have a bit more of a plot. I knew that something had to happen that was going to make them decide to have a fake relationship. And then, certain things happen in those type of stories. So that helped me. I think it gave me a little bit of a security blanket in that I had that sort of plot structure to follow. And I managed to write that. I did it in 8 weeks over school holidays and summer, and it was not ideal. And every summer I say to myself, I think we may have talked about this before, I'm not going to write, I'm going to somehow manage my writing, but I'm going to have the summer off. And so far, I've never managed to make that happen. In fact, I get worse and worse like this time. But anyway, I submitted this book, and I thought, it's not bad. It's the shortest real romance I'd written. It was only 100,000, and most of my books are quite a lot longer. And I thought, I really love this character, and I really love the hero. Yeah, it probably needs work, as all books do. But I thought, I think I've done it in 8 weeks, and I think I've managed to finally conquer it after, but then my publisher came back to me and she said, yeah, I'm not feeling Henry. That's the heroine, actually, Henrietta. She's like, she doesn't really have an arc. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right. So the long story is, even after you've been published, many times, these things can sometimes happen. And, I always said, I said to it, look, if it's really terrible, please don't just tell me. I mean, as hard as it is to take, I'd rather it not proceed to the next stage than put something out that's, really, really bad. But she's like, no, I think you can fix it, basically. And these are the problems that we had. So I've spent a month now rewriting that book again. And I think I've pretty much rewritten every single word almost. It's the biggest rewrite I've ever had. But I do believe, I think, after that experience, and then there's been a couple of other books where I've thought, 2/3 of the way through, this is not working and I can't finish it, but I have to. And they've been ones that require a little bit more rewriting or editing, structural edits. I believe, and I'm saying I think, that every book is salvageable. And that's a big call in a way, because I feel like it might just take longer to do. And it's not always worth salvaging. Sometimes the work that it would take to salvage a book, you may as well just go, okay, I cut my losses, I'm going to start something new. But I do think almost every book can be saved if you give it the right, attention.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a long story.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you listened to the Sophie Hannah interview that I did a few weeks ago, and she's got this thing she calls literary diagnostics. And, in her podcast, she talks about, she loved that TV show House.
Oh, yeah.
And she likes to think of herself as, the doctor getting the manuscript and doing like a literary diagnostics thing on it and looking at where it can be brought back to life, and I think I tend to agree.
Does she think most manuscripts are fixable?
Yeah. I think she would say that, if you can identify where the problems are, that's a big part of it, and then work out, okay, what are you going to do to fix that particular thing? Like you say, it could be the character arc, or it could be something to do with the character's motivation or whatever. So
I think one important point is also, it can happen, but you need time away from it. So when I submitted that book after 8 weeks, I knew that it was, I thought it was okay. I knew it would need work, but I couldn't do any more because I'd been so intense on it. I needed to let it rest. And because of timing, I just said to my publisher, look, it probably needs work, but here it is. And I'm not going to be able to do anything else now in a couple, I could take another 2 weeks and still it wouldn't be any better, because I need that break from it. And I feel like that's the same with the revisions I've just done. I've just done a month of revisions. I'll still have to do structural edits probably, and then copy edits. I added a lot into this manuscript. Like, it went from 100,000 to 118,000 words. I've added plane crashes and a whole load of other things, and a fear that the heroine has, and but I think now there's still work that could be done, but I was again at a point where I couldn't do any more with my mental, I needed to just have a break. So it's better than to give it to somebody else to read, whether that, depending on whether you're aspiring or whether that's your agent or a trusted critique partner. I think there does come a point where you need to step away for a little bit. And it's amazing then when you come back, not that it's easy, but you're much not that it's easy, but it's I can't think of the right word.
Yeah, but you've got that better perspective, I think. You've had that break and that mental space to just come back to it with a slightly fresher eye. Do you generally have you've talked a bit about having critique partners, so when you're doing, say, your draft, for instance, do you show anybody anything while you're in that draft stage?
Yeah, I've only got one. I was just having one person. So my mum always reads sort of probably in chunks, but she does more just to sort of be a cheer squad and to go, yeah, it's okay, you're on the right track, I enjoyed that. Or also then I can kind of sometimes discuss little plot points or whatever with her because she knows where I'm kind of going. And I've got another critique partner, Beck Nicholas, who she's the only person that I actually read all her stuff still, and she reads mine. You know, in my early years of writing when I was aspiring and didn't have contracts and that, I had probably about 4 or 5 people that I used to exchange work with in that, but for various reasons, either they've dropped away from writing or they are now pretty busy themselves, or another reasons often the genres change. You know, we started trying to write one thing and now we've kind of gone in different directions, and so you're not necessarily giving the right, you know, somebody else who could give better feedback. But Beck reads everything probably in a few chunks as well, maybe 4 or 5 times, you know, throughout the book as I'm writing. I will send it to her, and it's not so much, probably now I'm looking at, it's not so much a critique. She will pick up some things, but it's more so that then I've got someone able to brainstorm with and say, okay, now this has happened, I don't know what to happen next, and she knows what's happened. She's read it all herself, so she knows those characters kind of. So I find that really useful. I also have a semi-beta reader who I sometimes will read my drafts if I'm not sure and we've got time, and that's Bree from One Girl Too Many Books, so she's completely reader's perspective, and I think it's great having a reader perspective and a writer perspective, if that makes sense. So but that's all, not no one else.
Okay, yeah. And once your books go, I suppose it's different for each book, like you were saying with, you know, with Outback Secrets, that was a different experience. But once you sort of hand that draft, or, you know, cleaned up draft, if you like, or slightly revised draft into your publisher, is there much work that then you're doing on it afterwards in that revision stage with your publisher and editor?
It definitely changes from book to book. So some books I seem to get right more the first time, and others require a bit more mouth to mouth. I don't know. But I don't usually do that. This has quite been different in terms of I think maybe there's one other book where I've kind of submitted the draft and then they've said, it's not quite here yet. We don't want to go to structural edits yet. We want you to do a little bit more. Right. And sort of my publisher has given me just a little bit of guidance about where, I think was this one and maybe Just One Wish that happened. And I think it's important to look, because when I submitted Just One Wish, that was definitely my publisher. I could tell she didn't love it. You know, she kind of was like, oh, this doesn't feel like you quite have gone deep enough, or, you know, and then she gave me a few things that she wanted me to go back and revise. And again, I spent a few weeks doing that. And then we went to structural edits and then copy. Now that book has had great response. I've had great reviews. I won the Ruby Prize for Romance Writer Australia last year. It probably wouldn't have in that first iteration kind of thing. She did know what she was talking about, even though it was hard to hear that. So, you know, whereas other books, and it's funny, I don't think you necessarily always know yourself, because some of the books I've thought, oh, this is going to need a lot of work. When I submit it, they think, oh, it's pretty much that you're almost there, and the revisions, the edits have been a lot lighter. So I don't think you necessarily know as well. You know, you're too close sometimes for books. So what traditionally happens is, rarely I get revisions before it goes to structural. Usually I'd submit a draft and then it goes to structural edits. The last few years I've had Di Blacklock, who's fantastic at taking out my waffle. So my books have gone a little bit smaller. And, you know, so we'll do a structural edit looking at the big picture of, you know, whether characters are consistent, whether they're necessary even sometimes, you know, and then you go the type thing. One thing I always find with edits, and I think this is thing a lot of aspiring authors or people who are on their first couple of contracts, often, I want to say get wrong, that's not the right word, but they feel like they have to do everything that the publisher or the editor says. And that's definitely not true. It's your story in the end. I mean, most of the time they know, I'm sure you would agree, Pam, most of the time they know what they're talking about and they're right, but they may not be right about how to fix something. They may know something's wrong, but, you know, it's your book. And I think there's always that domino effect too. So they'll say, you know, for instance, my Outback Secrets, it was in 2 weeks. And my publisher was like, I'd really like it to take place a little bit longer, a longer period of time. So, you know, they can get to know each other better and doesn't feel so rushed, the romance. But that ruined, like, that changed a whole load more things to a publisher. It was just like, oh, just extend it slightly. But I'd set everything up in 2 weeks, and it was like a domino effect. Once you change that, you basically have to change every single thing. It's hard. But that was okay. I thought she was right deep down. But there's been other things in my book history where I've got quite a big change to make, or, you know, they've made a major suggestion. Say, for example, I wrote a book called The Patterson Girls. It was about a family curse. This is kind of a spoiler, so, but it's been out for a while, so you should have read it. No, not you, I'm talking Pamela, I mean everyone, so you don't have to read my books. What I'm saying is, so there's a possible incest twist towards the end of that book, and my publisher was wary about that, you know, because it's quite, I write, you know, mainstream, nice commercial fiction. We don't want to, you know, rock the boat too much kind of thing. And so she said, I'd rather you do something else or just finish the book here without this sort of, and I really didn't think it should be finished there. I felt like it needed that extra thing that I had. But I thought, okay, what else can I do instead that would have the same kind of effect, but not incest, but the same effect sort of in the plot. And I came up with 5 sort of ideas. And then I had a different editor at the time, same publisher. So a lot of people don't know, and it changes from house to house. But for me, my publisher doesn't actually do the specific edit. She sort of gives overall feedback, but then I have a specific editor. And the editor said, after I gave 5, he agreed with her to start with on the incest thing. And then he's like, no, you're right. Because I said, no, I gave him some other options. And he's like, none of them work. He said, this twist has to do 5 things. And I really wish that I'd kept his list of notes.
Oh, yeah. Because I should have kept that notebook, Reg.
I know. He said the twist has to do 5 things at this specific point. Your possible incest does every single one of those things. Whereas the other ideas that I'd come up, they did 2 or 3 and they didn't quite, you know, work. So I fought for that and said, no, I'm not going to change that. It's staying the way it is. And there's been other examples like that. And so one question I always ask myself, which I think might be useful for other people, is when you do get major big revision or structural edits and you think, oh, no, I don't want to do that. I always ask myself, do you not want to do it because I'm lazy? And let's face it, I am lazy. And rewriting is hard. It's very, very hard. It takes time. It's painful. You know, it's like taking a jigsaw puzzle out and then taking all the pictures off and then you're putting it back together. I don't know. But it's hard work. So I'm very lazy and I don't want to do it if possible. And I hate, you know, we all hate killing our darlings and losing specific, you know, lines that will not fit in them. So it's horrible. So I always ask myself, do you not want to do it because you know it's going to be a lot of work and you really can't be bothered? Or do you not want to do it because you think what you originally had or is right for the story? And if I think it's right for the story, I will fight and I will not change it. And so I really think that's something that, aspiring writers should be careful about. You know, even an editor, it's one person's opinion. So don't do anything that you feel, you know, completely is ruining what you think is the essence of your story. On the flip side, though, you can't be too precious. And you've got to learn to edit and rewrite. So it's a matter of working out what you think's worth fighting for, fight for those things, and then give them everything else.
No, I think that's really good advice. I had a similar thing. I mean, it wasn't a major thing, but it would have been major if I'd changed it with Cross My Heart. The editor, you know, great feedback on everything, but really wanted me to change the ages of the 2 girls and make them younger when a particular incident happened. And also have like a repressed memory, like a genuinely repressed memory, instead of somebody that just not wanting to remember something. And
you decided
if I changed both of those things, it would have changed the character's motivation completely. And I think that's the basis of the story.
Exactly. So. I also think sometimes, like, the editors, I mean, they're busy people like us, you know, they read the book with very closely and they do put a lot of effort in. But it's like sometimes you can say, oh, this needs to be changed or I like this, but then they don't, I feel like they don't necessarily follow through on what that means for the rest of the book, if that makes sense. So we have to go, okay, well, if I change that, what's that? And then that can show the problems. Whereas they've said, why don't you just do this, thinking that that's a great solution, but not necessarily thinking about all the things that's going to affect.
Yeah, for sure. It's a bit like, you know, your children better than anybody else, you know. So if you change, if there's something about them that really needs work, you know what it is generally. Not always.
That's funny.
I'm just going to turn that. Oh, my phone was just ringing. I just turned it off.
No.
So what about with How to Mend a Broken Heart? How did that whole like drafting process go? You know, you said you wanted to write the story in New Orleans and you had these ideas that you wanted to develop. How did all of that work for you with that particular story?
Well, with How to Mend a Broken Heart, I think I wrote it's interesting because I wanted to write the story, but my publisher was wary of being a sequel to women's fiction. You know, sequels work really well, I think, in romance and obviously series in romance and crime and stuff. But she was giving me a lot of feedback on big name authors sometimes that had done a sequel to a book that was really popular, and the sequels never kind of, you know, did, in general, they didn't do as well. And so she was very much really wary about me doing a semi, I'm calling it a semi-sequel. Yeah. So I had this idea again for quite a few years, and I think, as we talked about earlier, that can be a bad thing because in some ways, you know, you think too long, but it also was a good thing because it was kind of developing. While I was writing another number of other books, I always had this story in the back of my head. I knew I wanted it to be in New Orleans, and I knew I wanted to have this Miss Havisham character, and I knew my original. So I had that for quite a long time developing. But that didn't mean it was smooth sailing. So I wrote about 30,000 words in between contracted books, knowing that my publisher didn't want it, but thinking maybe if she reads the part, like I'm just going to write it. I was between edits and submitting something. Yeah. I thought I'm just going to use this time to write it because I was really passionate about writing it. And I think that really helped because I really wanted to write this story. It really helped me in the process of, you know, wanting to sit down on the computer and so it was kind of like a passion project, I guess, if that makes sense, because it wasn't contracted to start with. And then my agent and I did give the publisher the first 30,000 words, and still she was a little bit like, oh, you know, I don't know, but if you really want to write it, then okay, you know. And so I wrote this one quite fast too, because it was like, okay, well then you have to write it by now, so we'll put it out for Mother's Day. And I think for me, writing fast is the best thing, because writing fast for me is not writing fast for some people. It's not writing in a week. You know, it's when I say writing fast, that's my writing fast, and everyone's writing fast is different.
So that's like doing your 2,000 words a day or something.
Yeah, I think, and to me that's reasonably fast in terms of, and that's my best case scenario, because then I'm staying in the story and I don't have as much time to doubt. But there was definitely parts in this book, so it's hard to talk about without spoiler, about my Miss Havisham character. But interesting that you talked about repressed memories, because there's a little bit about memories in this book, in terms of, do we always remember things the way they actually happened, or do we sometimes, does time change our memories? And you know, can we, so I was really fascinated with that kind of concept too. But there was a few things that I wanted to happen with the Miss Havisham character that I didn't actually know whether I could pull it off. So a lot of the time while I was writing, I was thinking, am I writing towards this thing that's going to happen at the end, and it's actually not going to make any sense? And so that was a little bit, you know, daunting. Yeah. But at the same time, I really kind of wanted to do it. But I do remember, you know, because I don't plan a plot, you know, spoiler here, the main character is not really that big a spoiler. The main character's ex turns up in New Orleans as well. And I didn't know that was going to happen necessarily until I was about 40,000 words into the book. And then I thought, oh, this would work better if this happens. So then I'm kind of writing towards that. So I think I sort of do plot, but in my micro, maybe it's micro plotting, you know, like I start and then I think what's going to happen in the next few chapters. And then I write sort of a few notes about that, and I go another few chapters, and then I think ahead. And it works mostly, although sometimes I really do feel like I'll halt for a couple of days, because I'm like, I really don't know how I'm going to get. I know that, say, I want these two to get together and kiss or something, but I don't know how to do it organically. And I guess that happens with plotters as well, you know, because they've got, well, this is going to be a kiss and this is going to be murder discovery or whatever, but how those things actually happen. And so then I find that I sometimes do have to stop, and that's why I should always account for this in the beginning when I'm planning time. And I'll just have to think about it for a few days. And sometimes I'll just keep trying at the computer. Other times I'll step away, go for a walk, read a book or whatever. And I'm learning that it's usually better if I step away, actually. It feels, and it's so hard to do because you think, oh, I'm wasting a whole day, I'm not getting any words and stuff. But it's usually better if I can just step away and percolate and think, and that's where I sort of relate to what Craig Silvey said when I was listening to him the other night, in that actually writing 2,000 words is, it's not always the best way, because if the words are flowing and you know what you're doing, then it's great to have that goal, and it helps to stop procrastinate, because you're like, oh, right, this much and I'll keep going. But if you don't know what you're doing, or you need to really think about the scene, then just aimlessly writing 2,000 words, it could take you off on you have to fix it. So I think it's a matter of, really thinking about your writing process and what you're writing. I should say, although I don't plot overall, when I say that micro plotting, so each chapter I will have a page in my notebook and I'll write, what's the point of this chapter? Some's more airy-fairy, and I'll write like little, just trying to think of the one I've just had. I'll write little snippets of dialogue that might come to me while I'm, thinking about that story. Just trying to think. So, I've got chapter 4 here, Mysterious Benefactor. Liam visits the library. That's in the second, version.
Yeah.
And, Liam left his book behind. So did he do it on purpose, or did he, so I'll write that sort of stuff, daily kind of thing. So if I'm writing chapter 2, I'll write notes about chapter 2. So I have a vague idea kind of what I'm doing as I go along, but it's much more micro plotting than sort of, overall.
Yeah. And are you someone that when you go to bed at night, everything's, the story's working around in your head, or do you just like to try and shut off from the story and start fresh again the next day?
A bit of both, actually, which I know sounds really weird, but I do sometimes, just before I'm falling asleep, I always read at night, but after I've finished reading, whatever, I will think about my own story just a little bit, kind of to have it in my head. And then, think about it again when I wake up in the morning, if I'm lying there in that kind of, half asleep, half awake. So I kind of do that, I think, not necessarily like I don't mean to do it, but I just do. But I mean, I have voices in my head all night, which is really annoying. And they're not if there were my characters' voices, that would be good. But it's just random people. So, I think a lot of writers find sleeping and switching off difficult. And I think that's one of the things. I mean, these days with so much social media in every job and the access via email and, mobiles and stuff, I think so many people are never switching off from their actual jobs. But with a creative job like writing, you, as you said, with walking the dog or washing dishes or, doing something completely different, and your book is always kind of there in your head. I actually listened to Ellen Hildebrand recently on a podcast, and she was saying that she plans on retiring in 4 years. She's got a specific retirement plan.
Retiring from writing?
Yeah. And so she'll be 55, she said, and she's, obviously she can do it. But she said to the people in the podcast, they were like, "Are you sure?" Because there are other writers. Will you be able to do that? Because she said, yeah. She said, "I totally mean it," because she said, "I want to live without constantly having a book hanging over my head." You know what I mean? And I understand that. It's a joyous thing to do in a lot of ways, but it's also very draining and it's all consuming. She said, "I want to be able to hang out with my family or do that without thinking, oh, what's that book and what are the characters?" And it's one of those things hard to switch off. So everyone, does it differently. But she also writes 2 books a year. And so that is kind of, it's all consuming. And so I understand what she means.
Are you doing 2 books a year, Rach, at the moment?
I have for the past few years, couple of years again. I had a couple of years where I only had 1. And then last year there was 2, this year there's 2. Next year there probably won't be 2. So I feel in some ways for me, because I don't do a huge, it's not historical, I don't do a huge that kind of research or to me 1 book is not enough, but 2's too much, if that makes sense. I kind of feel I get sort of not bored, but just feel anxious if I'm not, writing. It's a weird thing. But then 2 books is too much almost. That's just a bit too much pressure. But 1 is not enough pressure.
I can see where that might be the case. Yeah. And you mentioned a couple of books earlier, Rachel, the Emotion Thesaurus and the Archetypes one. Are there any other books that you recommend as great craft books for writers?
So those are more like I suppose they're definitely craft in terms of, specifics, and they, the Emotional Thesaurus I use daily in terms of when there's a type of emotion. Like I've got on my screen here little 2 post-it notes that I had from last week when I was rewriting. One was panic, and I'd written all the different symptoms for panic. So that's more like a really useful day-to-day book, and the heroes and heroines at the beginning. But I mean, as much as I hate structure in terms of it panics me, and if I think about it too much, I just lose the plot completely. I do like Save the Cat Writes a Novel quite a lot, in terms of it gives you different types of novels and sort of the structure that it should be. It's got, I think, 10 or 12 different sort of genres within fiction, and shows the types of notes you should hit. So I don't like to study it too closely, but I like having an overall knowledge.
Just keep it floating around out there.
Yeah, I do love Big Magic and Stephen King's on writing, just in terms of creativity and living, creative life, I suppose, but also using Stephen King specifically in terms of some real practical things about if you are doing this for a career and a job. I love that he thinks you should he says you have to write a book within 3 months, basically, I think.
I think he's big on the fast writing thing.
Yeah. I mean, and again, that's just that's his opinion and stuff, and obviously some people take 13 years and write a brilliant book, but I do resonate with a lot of he says. Recently I found this, I don't know if you've seen it, Pam, the 10
I've seen that it's about, but I keep meaning to check it out.
Joanne Harris. So who wrote Chocolat, and a few others, but she apparently started with a blog post of just different parts of writing and things, and so it's really, I wasn't say basic, but that's not what I mean. It's kind of like really succinct in terms of this is seasons and how that affects your writing, and she's got 10 sort of ways to look at it. So I find this is a good one too, because it's craft, but it's also business, social media. It's just the whole package of writing, so that's quite and you can dive in and out of it too. It's something you can just go, okay, like at the front there's a great contents, one's where do I start, what makes a story, another is characterization, another's first draft, then you got publication and beyond, so you can think, I just want to know about drafting, so you can go to that quite easily. But I'm enjoying that one at the moment.
The things about writing, Joanne Harris, you know what I'm going to be ordering when we call, don't you? Yes. I often pick up good books from you. I think I bought that Archetypes one after you talked about it.
And this is the good thing about this one, is I actually have read bits of it, because I know that we've talked about this before. I have a habit of, I've got whole shelves of craft writing books behind me, but most of them I haven't actually read. I just like the look of them, and it's a bit like that diet thing again. I think, okay, if I buy this book, it's going to reinvent how I write, and it's going to be easier, and I'm going to write a breakout novel that but it never comes works that way. Maybe if I actually read them, it would.
It's finding the time to read them. That's the problem.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah. I just want to check, Rach, I did put a post up on social media, it was only yesterday, and said, were there any readers out there or writers who wanted me to ask you any questions? And we've actually covered the bit about, one of the questions was, how often do you reject what you've written and start over? So you've talked about that with Outback Secrets, but I'm gathering often, that's not a frequent occurrence.
Yeah.
And somebody else asked, do you think that you would write any more sequels to any of your other books? And what's your thought? I know that this one's a semi-sequel, but what's your thought generally on sequels?
It's interesting. I'm sure you've had it too, Pam, that whenever someone finishes a book, they're like, I want to know more, and we need a sequel, because and I'm always thinking, no, it's finished. That's it. Now you can imagine what happened to them after, but that's the story. The thing that's the main thrust of that book has finished, and you'd have to give your characters more horrible things that would happen to them, or more drama, and mostly I'm happy to leave them be and then find new characters to give drama to. But so there's a couple of books that I've written sequels to that I never planned to. My very first book, Jilted, I wrote a rural romance that was just, to me, I didn't really know that series would maybe be a good thing, or so I wrote a book, and then didn't even think about setting up other characters in that book to be series, but then so many people wanted more in that book world, and so a few years afterwards, and I learned from the feedback I got from that first book and Mandrat, which was my second, I did decide to write a series, and I wrote the Bunyip Bay series, because I realized that readers are always asking for more, and if they do like a world, they want to go back again. So I specifically then wrote a series, but I went back to the world of Jilted and I chose a character. There was only really one character in there that could have a story, and she was a horrible person in my first book. So I was thinking, oh, I don't know. So that was a bit of a challenge to but I never planned it, but I redeemed this horrible character and people seem to like her. And then Flying the Nest is one that I've got a couple of people already say they want more. Just One Wish, The Patterson Girls. But most of those books, to me, Flying the Nest possibly because I could take another character from the book, well, like the world of the book, and show you their story. Patterson Girls about 4 sisters. To me, it's done. So I don't like it's. And one thing I have learned, I think, through writing Outback Secrets too, I'll admit one of the reasons I decided to write that book was because people kept saying they wanted more and more from the Bunyip Bay series, but I'd never planned to write. I wrote a 3-book series, and then I wrote a 4th that wasn't planned, but that worked okay. And then people were still saying they want more, and really the only character I had was the publican. And I love reading books about pubs. I remember you've written a book about pubs a lot, and I've written one about pub before. I love books about pubs and publicans. So I thought, yeah, that's great. I'll do that, and we'll give everyone the return to Bunyip Bay. But I think one of the reasons why I really struggled is because that was why I was writing it, because I thought people want a series book set in this, and so I've got to find something. Whereas I learned through writing this that that's not the ideal way to do it. Whereas How to Mend a Broken Heart, I did it because I had a story in my head, and I wasn't prepared to write it until I had that story. Whereas with Outback Secrets, I was trying to find a story because I knew people wanted a book in that world. And so I don't know if the answer is never say never, because if a story comes to me, I would be quite happy to return to the world of a book. But I'm really going to be careful now about returning to the world of the book for the wrong reasons. And that's just because people want, me to do that. Because I think you really need to have, as much as pants as can, an idea of where you're going and a reason for writing the story and something you're passionate about in it. Not just say, I need to write a book. And I think that's one of the problems when you become a career author, I suppose, like we are, and you are, having to produce, multiple books. It's sometimes you don't have that passionate idea that comes to you. And that it's harder, and you have to go looking for an idea a little bit more. And that's fine. There's been many books that I've had to sort of manufacture more than, had sort of a strike of inspiration, and we can't always tell the difference by the time I'm finished. But I'm really wary now. I'm learning that the best way is if you have got a really strike of inspiration, at least to start with something that excites you about the story, rather than, kind of manufacturing, as I say, an idea. So
no, I think that makes sense. And certainly in terms of what we were talking about to do with, creativity and having that creative well to keep diving back into and to keep those, the inspiration going. I mean, that's what it's all about, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, we've covered so much, Rachel, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about your process and just being so honest about, all of your writing life and quirks. We are going to be talking about 4 curly questions for the Patreon supporters, but that'll be in another interview. But if people do want to find that, they can go to the patreon.com and look up Rights for Women and support the podcast there, and then you do get bonuses through that. So just before we finish, though, if you could tell us just a little bit about, we have talked about How to Mend a Broken Heart, but when that's out and where people can find it when it comes out.
Sure. Well, How to Mend a Broken Heart is out on the 5th of May, and it should be available in all bookshops across Australia and New Zealand, in Big W, Kmart, Target as well. And you can obviously buy the digital editions online and the audiobook. It's read by the fabulous Casey Withers, who everyone just loves. So I'm sure she's going to do a fantastic job. Yeah.
And you've been signing books for Booktopia today.
I have too. So, there might still be some signed copies for Booktopia. My hand's a little sore. I've been signing lots of books today.
Well, that's fantastic, Rachel. I know it's going to do brilliantly. I love the cover, love the title, and really looking. I've got my copy. Actually, I had my copy here yesterday. It is here somewhere, and I can't wait to read it. So, but we will be talking again soon.
Thank you so much, Pam, and everyone who listened.
Thanks, Rach.